everybody. We might get started. We'll do our quick whip round the table as is customary, but just by way of a brief bio on Dom this morning, we're delighted to welcome Dom Price from Atlassian to our offices. Welcome to Granite Consulting. Brief bio on Dom: finished his education in the UK, joined a leading consulting firm, working his way up to director level, working across the globe with businesses. From there, joined a multinational gaming organisation, which eventually meant he found his way to Sydney, and is now the head of R&D and programme management at Atlassian, undoubtedly one of the leading lights of the tech industry in Australia. And today's session is on hacking our culture.
You all know who I am now, so that's good. We've finally got the technology working, so I think it's always great when you have someone from the leading technology company in Australia come and the laptop doesn't work. It's always a good start. So this is going to be an interactive session, so for those that have just come for breakfast and coffee, you're going to be really upset because I'm going to make you do some work. I have got some content in here, and I do want to share some stories from Atlassian and how we do it, but I also want to hear from around the room about how you lot approach this, because I think that's going to be where we find the golden nuggets. So we're going to open up with a question. I want you to work in pairs, but preferably with someone. If you're with someone that you work with, try and just pair it with someone else. Really simple. When we talk about hacking culture, why would you do it? And I want one answer only, right? So you can't give the chapter and verse of all the reasons. It's a single reason why you would do it. Also, why you don't. Like, what is the number one barrier that stops you from hacking at your culture and making changes? And the third one, which tends to be the most contentious question, is who do you think owns it? Now, you don't have to name the person. It's not Barry or John or Mary, but which role in an organisation should own hacking the culture? Right. Who wants to go first?
Why would you? Financials.
Yeah.
Why don't you? It's about upset the apple cart, that's not one word. But
Yeah, no, it's all right.
and who owns it? Everyone.
Everyone.
Even the clerk who's doing some important work, but it might be, simple work. He may not know it, but he's a part of it as well.
So who thinks that everyone owning it might be a problem?
It's not exactly a problem, everyone owns it, but there's a saying that fish rots from the head down. Mm-hmm. Everyone owns it, but management have the ability to fix it much more.
Okay. Who's management?
Anyone
Are we management?
Yeah, anyone with a perceived position of power.
Okay. Can I imagine in some organisations that's a lot of people. Potentially different to the people that actually have power or
Yes.
think they have power. I can almost see a Venn diagram in my head and it's just got messy.
Yes.
I feel like I have, but I haven't, but they think I have. It's a different session altogether. It's like a counselling session. That one.
And you do it for talent attraction as well. So there'd be, there's organisations, Virgin are doing things like paternity leave, which sounds crazy, but you get a dog, a new puppy, and you have a week off to look after it, which sounds crazy, and it probably is, but it attracts a different type of person to the organisation if that's what's in your organisation's values. And, it's roll your eyes, and that's probably why you don't do it, because people can be have views that are a little bit more traditional. But if you want to attract talent to your organisation, sometimes you have to be a bit.
Got something a bit different, yeah.
Yeah.
I like it.
So what do you have along here?
You want to go?
Yes. So why would we do it? We were split between creating value and flexibility, and I think that was across the whole organisation, everything that we do. Why wouldn't we do it? I think the fear of change, and we wanted to say that it was owned by everyone, but ultimately what we settled on is it starts at the top.
Yeah. Okay. I'm always a fan of a little bit of wordsmithing, and the wordsmithing I love with culture is that if you drop the URE off the end, right, it's a cult.
Yeah.
And so I've consulted in plenty of organisations where it's so strong, you're like, this isn't a culture anymore, it's a cult. And it's almost like you all have some kind of informal membership. I've not quite seen the handshake or the nod or how you do it, but you're all dressing the same, and you're all using the same words, and I actually feel like an outsider. And whilst from an interner's perspective, you see that as a really strong culture, from someone trying to integrate into that, it just looks like a massive barrier. And it also seems like it's resistant to change. Even though that thing talks about change and espouses change and innovation, it's so self-satisfying because it's the same people that are members of the same group that you never actually get innovation, and you don't get wacky thoughts, right? You get the same thing churned out again and again. So I think there's a massive trade-off, and it's one of the things we've been balancing at Atlassian. We've got really two strong co-founders who started the business out of university. They are massively passionate, not just about the business, but about culture and about people, except there's two of them, and there's 1,300 of us. All right, our growth has been exponential over the last 12 years, and in the last 18 months particularly, we've doubled in size. So they took on a role when they first started the organisation that they owned culture, and they did. They owned setting the culture and setting the guidelines and the structure in that top level, and they also currently own the tone from the top. They have to be seen to be living and breathing our culture, otherwise the whole thing goes to pot. But what we've done, partially by accident, I don't mind admitting that, but also through a lot of hard work and purposeful thinking, is we've actually set up subcultures, because each of our locations are in different customs, different cultures, and we want them to adapt. So the example I'll give may offend some of you, but I'm going to be honest. So one of our cultural values, don't f*** the customer, right? Really strong value in Atlassian. We do not exist without our customers. When Mike and Scott created that value, they didn't want think about the customer or care about the customer or consider. They wanted to be really clear what your role was. Do not screw that customer over, because without them, we will not exist. And it drives a very clear set of behaviors. Big problem when you open an office in Vietnam, right? So we opened an office in Vietnam 18 months ago, and one of the first things we do is a tributes of arrival. We've got our values on posters, and we want to explain, we've got t-shirts, we want to explain to them what we live by. And we start explaining the values, and there was just blank faces in the room. Because to them, they're like, well, no, you rip off your customer to get as much money from them as possible. I was like, okay, let's try the other one. Be the change you seek. And they're like, oh, no, you never offend your boss. I'm like, oh, so you've got don't screw your boss, but you can do whatever you want to the customer. Like, to them, it was a foreign concept, because the organisations they'd worked in, you did everything you could to burn the customer, because you'd always get another one, but you didn't do anything to offend your boss, ever. And you certainly wouldn't suggest a change, just in case it offended them. And so we were trying to explain to them our culture. So what we've done there is we've said that our values aren't up for debate, because they are our corporate values and how we work together. And we love them because they're not very corporate-y, right? They're kind of plain English statements that most people look at and go, I get that, that makes sense. Be the change you seek. Instead of whinging when I see something that's broken, I'll just fix it. Okay, so it's really tangible for people to understand, but what we said to the guys in Vietnam is adapt these. So keep the values, but create stories locally that make sense. And so it's about saying, if you are going to create a subculture, or you acknowledge that a subculture will exist, either because of size, distribution, spread, or just because people have a different identity, let that happen, but do it on purpose. And make sure it still has that global element. So just a little bit about Atlassian, and this is why hacking the culture has become so important to us. So 1,300 people globally, 5 development centers. We've got one in Poland, we've got one in Vietnam, 2 in the US, which is San Fran and Austin, which themselves have very different cultures and backgrounds. Our head office is in Sydney. Very proud to be an Australian company. And we've also got other pilot offices out in Amsterdam, Brazil, Kuala Lumpur, right? So we've got quite a spread for what I still consider a relatively small organisation. The thing that makes culture super important to us, 2 things. One, we're growing 100% every 18 months. So I am, whilst I use tools like you spoke about, and I'll speak more about those shortly, around Net Promoter Score and getting a feel for the organisation, I can't wait to hear the news to fix culture. So I would say about half of what we're doing right now is preemptive strikes, because we're saying at our rate of growth, going from 620 people when I started 18 months ago, and we're now over 1,300. I can't wait for that survey to go out to find out that 600 of the new people don't quite like the way we do it, to fix it, because it's too late. That subculture already exists. And that identity and bond that they've found, that's probably stickier than the one that I'm going to try and replace it with. So what we find is that changing this after the event can get really hard, because you get a lot of people going, yeah. No. Right? So you get the passive aggressive behavior. So the number one barrier to me, the thing I found hardest in my entire career around cultural change, about two things. I can cheat, I'm the presenter. One is measuring it. So people go, oh yeah, really great idea. How do we know when we're done? Or how do we know if it's worked? You're like, well, you can't stick a thermometer in all your staff, so you need to find a way of pulse checking, but you're trying to find an absolute measure on something that's kind of a gut instinct and feel. Like you walk into a place and you listen to your team and you know whether they're happy or not. So how do you measure that? The other part being really hard. Like it's really hard to do, because you're saying to someone, I want to question and I want to interpret your values and your morals and your way of working and your style and your personality and way of communicating. And some of those, as an employer, do I have the right to do that? Do I actually how do I do culture hacking and get people with strong values and do diversity at the same time? Because I want different people, as long as you're all the same. And I'm sure we've all been in organisations where you walk around and go, literally, I think you've got all these people from the same DNA pool. Like it's like you've traced the family tree back a few series, and everyone kind of sounds the same, right? Sounds like a family. So for us, a lot of it's preemptive strikes. We still use good data to make sure that we're dealing with the issues that are there now, and I think that's always important. One of the bits of context that make this super important in the Atlassian world is we don't run a hierarchy. So the idea that messages filter down doesn't work, because we run a really flat structure. So if I give an example, anyone who's used Jira, one of our first products, Jira is about a 100-person team globally, split between 3 locations. But actually, Jira is 10 teams of 10. So the notion of cascading messages down this hierarchy, we don't have org charts anywhere in the business. Right? You will not find an org chart anywhere in our office, because no one cares about reporting lines. They care about the team they work with and the problem they're working on. So the identity we have is to the work, not Annie is my boss, therefore I should meet with Annie every couple of weeks, and I should set goals with Annie, and I should see if Annie likes me or not, and Annie will do my performance review. That's kind of out the window. What we say is I'm working with you on this project and with you on this project. So you're the people I'm going to be meeting with, and your surrounding teams, and anyone else we're impacting. And so my care factor is now to my stakeholders and customers, rather than this reporting line that drives me insane every day. And so what that means is we have to get our culture and certainly our messaging and values super strong, so that those teams can operate with autonomy. So the only way this works for us, when you spread those across 5 development centers, is you say they have to be self-sufficient. If they're not self-sufficient and they need the CEO or a senior person there to say, no, that's not consistent with our values, that doesn't scale. And certainly not our rate of growth. So what we've tried to do is find ways of instilling what are our current cultural values, but also looking at how do we continually change and not settle for today.
If it's a flat, how do you measure performance? So you've got 10 teams,
Yeah.
10 people all over the world working on Jira.
Yeah.
You want to know team A is doing very, very well.
Yeah.
Team B is doing okay, we need some more coaching.
Mm-hmm.
Not only for culture basis, but if they're not reporting to anyone, they don't have any goals, how do you know?
Awesome.
Them up?
Yeah, so we have accountability is a key thing, and this is where culture is really hard, right? So we have someone who owns Jira engineering, right? His role is to run the entire engineering for Jira. I don't care how any of his teams are doing. He does. So what happens is, because those teams work autonomously and they're all working towards the same end goal, a very strange thing happens. First of all, they compete with each other because they all want to be the best team. Right? Our staff are very competitive. None of them want to be last. But when you get the culture right, you have this really weird side effect that makes me chuckle when I see it happen, is the teams self-correct. So they demo to each other at the end of a fortnight, this is the progress we've made, this is the feature we're working on, this is where we've got to. And if I'm part of one of the other teams and I'm thinking, they are way behind, instead of rubbing my hands and going, I'm the winner, chicken dinner, right? They sit there and go, would it help if I lent you a couple of my developers for the next 2 weeks so you can get back on track? So they have a more profound goal set around the product and what they're launching in shared success, and their secondary value is their individual success. So we have a number of ways that we try and maintain that harmony, because I'm convinced it's the tiniest sweet spot in the world, and I'm worried that when we flip either side, right, bad things will happen. But so far that balance is there. So the main identity those teams have is the Jira identity. The secondary identity is their team. And so what you find is that self-correction, and they help each other. They balance out. So they're all aiming towards the same end goal.
Do the teams get reshuffled, or is it
All the time.
fixed?
All the time.
Which helps towards the broader Jira.
Constant reshuffling, yeah. Which is actually seen as a positive. So our teams love the fact that they get the variety and the excitement that it brings, that when I've finished on this current sprint or set of products or current project or work, the next thing I'm going to be doing could be completely different. Could be very similar. One of the things that motivates our staff is a desire for mastery. So they love autonomy, but that alone doesn't give them the satisfaction of work. So they love to become a master of something, and the minute they feel like they've conquered that, their engagement level bottoms out and they want to go and become a master of the next thing. So we have to have those doors open to move them around. So how do we do this? Let's get into a little bit of the nitty gritty, and then we can do a bit of Q&A, and I can talk about any specific examples. So similar to your point around about how do you find out, right? So we ask and we listen. I put those two statements down because I find, certainly from my consulting days and when I talk to friends, they do one of these really well, but rarely both. So either they think they just listen, but they've not actually asked any questions. So they're just walking around going, yeah, I take the pulse of the organisation all the time. I walk the floors. And you go, oh, okay, who do you ask what? No, I walk the floors. The team over there were chuckling. Culture's really good. That team over there stayed late. Yeah, that team over there stayed late. Everything's fine, like they're committed. You know, do you know why they're staying late? So they're listening, but they're not asking. There's the other group, which I think are worse. They ask, but they don't listen. And the reason I think that's worse is you set a really clear expectation when you ask. So if I ask how you are, and then I don't listen when you answer me, that's worse than me just ignoring you. Right, so I've seen this in plenty of organisations where they spend a huge amount of time and resource and effort doing all these pulse checks and going, well, grumbly gits, they're all whinging again. I mean, we gave them a pay rise last year and now they're whinging about this, and like they're never happy, and so they ask, but they don't listen. So we try and do both in tandem. Number of different places we get these data points from. So BRW does their survey once a year. 2 years ago we were in second place, and this year we were fortunate enough to come first. The interesting thing is, as you can imagine, with co-CEOs who are founders, who are as passionate about the business as Mark and Scott are, the first thing they wanted from the survey results was the areas where we scored the lowest. So they are always going to go back to the areas where we do well, because it's a good reminder for us of the things we did well and how we should do more of them. But the number one thing is, where are the top 3 areas we struggled on, and why? It's this relentlessness to get better. You're in the 98th percentile, but it's this relentlessness to just, I want to do more. I need to know the 2% that we didn't get right. And it's not to beat yourself up about, it's to get those critical data points. So we use those. That's really good for existing employees. We also do our own survey, which is equivalent of like an internal NPS, Net Promoter Score, which is a vital signs survey. And in there, we're not only trying to get the feel of the organisation in terms of mood, but also trying to get an understanding of how our strategy and vision connects with them, because we see that as a key way of people understanding our culture. Next thing we do is our co-founders do an all hands every month, and our senior leadership team, whoever they are in each local office, do the same thing. And there's every single member of staff in that building invited to a 1-hour meeting. It's a couple of slots of top topics and us talking to them. And then in every single session, there is an anonymous, we use one of our own tools, Confluence questions, where anyone in the organisation can log a question. And as I look at the other questions that have been logged, I can vote them up or vote them down. And the top 15 voted questions get asked, whatever they are. And there is no repercussion. Some people say to me, well, that doesn't give you a sign of culture. It really does. because you'll see the questions that are being voted up. You know the things that are on the top of people's minds that they've not dared ask, or that may be a problem if we don't solve them. And it's also good indicators to us around what content to have in the all hands, so that we satisfy the people's needs before it becomes a question. So we don't beat ourselves up on this, but it's almost as if the same question comes up a couple of all hands in a row, we've failed somewhere. Like we've missed that messaging and we've not catered to that. We do regular check-ins, both at a personal level. So instead of performance review, we do monthly and quarterly and annual check-ins with our teams. How are you doing? What are your personal goals? How are they progressing? What barriers are you up against? Who are you working with? What's going well? What's not going so well? We also do them at a functional level. So each of our product families do quarterly check-ins with our founders. How's your product family going? What's working well? Oh, we're releasing on time. That's going really well, but customers aren't loving it, or quality's down. So we're constantly having conversations around how we're doing in a very open format, and in one where there are consequences, but they tend to be positive. And the reason they tend to be positive is the conversation tends to go like this. I'm in Jira, things are going really well, but I want to release 6.4 early because I think it's going to delight our customers. But I'm short of 5 people. I need 5 back-end engineers, and I think I can do it early, and these are the benefits. They're the kind of conversation we're having, rather than going, you know how that dashboard report I've been sending you for the last few months has said green and meant red? I just couldn't find the red button on PowerPoint, so I've been doing green, if that's all right. And I thought I'd save it for this conversation, and we could work out why that happened, whose fault it is, because they're not in the room, and then we can just crack on for another quarter, if that's all right. So those conversations are really honest, because the purpose of them is, what can we do to help to either get those things back on track or keep them on track? And for Dave and Annie, who were and Lucy at the session last night, the tool that we used there was one I talked about last night at the PMI team, which is we do a health check. What is the health of the team? The other thing we do is we really care a lot about external. So a couple of the books that I've been reading recently to keep myself up to speed on this, Creativity Inc., which is about Pixar. Anyone in the room read that? Awesome book. Grab it, read it. It's one of those things that you'll read and go, this isn't relevant to me, that's Pixar and Disney. They've got endless amounts of money. They can do whatever they want, except there's not a single story in there that costs any money. So I had a friend who read it and said, well, it's all right for them, they're loaded. And I said, there is not a single idea in there that's cost $1. So if that's your barrier, take your blinkers off. The other one is a book called Scaling Up Excellence by a Stanford lecturer called Huggy Rao, who studied Facebook, Twitter, Adobe, a whole lot of tech companies. And he's got a couple of models in there that I think sort of resonated with the statement before about tone from the top. He said, when you're rolling out change, you either take the Catholic model or the Buddhist model. The Catholic model says it's going to be the same everywhere, and we must force this. It must look and smell the same in every location. The Buddhist model says, give them a set of principles and philosophies and give them freedom to adopt them into their local environment. And he said, neither's right and neither's wrong. Just make sure you pick before you go. Because if you use the Catholic model when you want the Buddhist one, bad things will happen, and vice versa. So that's all around how you scale excellence and operations and culture at rapid growth. The other thing we do, and this is kind of to your point of collaboration, is every time we have an idea or a thing we're going to fix or we want to address or anything, we add that to our backlog, and our backlog is publicly available in our organization. So every time we think of making a change, the very first thing we do is publish that thought and share it. Everyone knows where it is, but we share it. And that enables us to say, if I've guessed and got this wrong, please tell me. I don't have to make that statement. I just open that up to 1,300 people and they will tell me if I've got it wrong. But that enables us to really understand what are the priorities. Have I just heard the loudest person in the room and I'm going to fix something for him? Or have I really uncovered the root cause of what our cultural challenge is here?
Can I just ask,
Yeah.
with your reviews or discussions a bit more informal than, say, a traditional model,
Yeah.
where do your REM review type discussions sit in that?
We do those annually, so they're the back end of four informal check-in reviews. And we then do a contribution exercise. How much did you contribute? And we just rate people. So the output of all those data points and analysis and external books and looking at people that we kind of crush on, like Spotify and Facebook. Oh, I wish I were more like Google, right? So we do all that, and then this is what we came out with, which is the net result of our view of how we hack our culture. Now, the interesting thing that got me, you mentioned before hiring, right? So we decided that the very first part of our cultural mission was hiring, because the first touch most people have with the Atlassian business is when they're applying for a role. And if we don't get it right in there, then the rest of it's kind of a waste, right? So what we do is we've actually added culture as part of our screening for new hires. Now, that was really hard to implement, because for every role, we're averaging around 200 applicants per role. That's probably gone a bit higher recently since we won Best Place to Work. So we are doing a culture screen on every single employee to say, these are our values, which one means the most to you and why? We structure the question in a variety of different ways, but what we were asking our interviews to do is understand not only will this person be able to survive in our environment, but will they contribute over and above the average to this environment? And when you're looking for things like be the change you seek and don't bleep the customer, it actually is quite easy to understand whether someone is geared or engineered into that way of thinking or not. The next thing is then that actual first impression once they're in the building. So we invest heavily in training and onboarding to make sure that not only the messages get across, but that we use that time to ask and listen to those people. Why did you join? What did you see that made you want to join? What did you see that didn't make you want to join? Which other companies were you looking at and why? We did this recently. We had 39 graduates start on the 19th of January. And at the end of their first week, we sat them down for beers and a pizza, and I was like, I'm going to ask you the weirdest question. What were the 2 other companies you applied to, and why didn't you go there? Because I'm really happy that you're here, but I want to know what your other options are. I want to know who my competition is. For our graduates, we also did a 4-week intensive boot camp. So we sat them down on day 1 and said, really good news, you've got the job, except we want to break you. We want to break you because we don't want you to write assignments anymore. We want you to write products. And we don't want you to think about your professor. We want you to think about customers. And we don't want you to think about grades. We want you to think about usability. And whilst you understand all those words, you have no idea what you're about to be in for. So what we did in that week was we gave them 3 days of training and team exercises. And then on the Thursday morning of their first week, we said, right, tomorrow afternoon, you're presenting to the entire organization. You've got 24 hours, develop an idea, go. So they formed 10 teams, and they started hacking at our products and hacking at our tools and our processes. And on the Friday night, in front of 450 people in Sydney, they stood up and presented their ideas at the end of their first week. They were absolutely petrified. But there is not much that gets them to learn our cultural values and our way of working, which is getting stuff done, than saying, do it, go for it, be the change you seek. Go and have a look, see something that you don't like, and fix it. And they did. They attacked it with gusto. The weird byproduct of doing things like that is their presentation skills have now gone through the roof. Now, if I'd said to them, how are your presentation skills? They were probably average. And if I'd put them on a course, they would have stayed average, because they would have listened and gone, I'm still scared of presenting. But when you give them something that they're passionate about and excited about, they just jump at it. There was no fear. There was a huge amount of fear, because you could actually see them, some of them physically shaking. But the excitement overrode the fear. So onboarding and ongoing training is crucial for us. Team is probably more important for us than individual, and that's a really important categorization for us. Our success comes from healthy teams. So, like I say, Annie and David were at the session last night where I talked about how we understand teams and projects and team health and the work we do to keep our teams healthy in the way they work. And here, that's a lot of roles and responsibilities. So making sure people are clear on their roles, that's particularly important for us, given the way we constantly move those teams around. And the fact that you haven't got this strong reporting line identity that says, I work for David, therefore I know if David's worried about this, I should be. So when you haven't got that strong link, you need other mechanisms in place that give you that clarity. Without that clarity, you just get confusion. The other thing we've got is a Playbook, which is our version of kind of a PMO and process, but very, very loose touch. So we focus more on patterns rather than process, because we believe patterns are stronger and patterns are also easier to change. Problem with a process is the minute you document it and you date it and you give it a revision date, it's out of date the minute you publish it. And the fact that you promised to look at it in a year's time means that for 364 days, it's a waste of time. All right, people look at it and go, oh, that's weird. That bears no resemblance to what we actually do. So it's those patterns of what you actually do that we focus on, and then we continually try and iterate on those patterns. Which bit of the pattern work? What's the 80% that worked we want to keep? What's the 20% that didn't work that we want to change? And we have a playbook that we use to do that. And then the final thing is our tooling, which is ironic because for our engineers, they kind of thought that's where we're going to start because they're all about tooling. They're all about the system. So what we have emphasized with them is that will help you and that will always be a critical part of your role, but it will not make you successful because it's easy to copy and everyone can do it. So if you're looking at a differentiator, tooling is not going to be it. Even though we're a technology company and we sell technology tools, what we know is that it's teams and how they use those tools that become successful rather than the tools themselves. And then at the bottom we've got a couple of things, which is the Readme, and the Readme is our way of saying everything that we do in how we hack our culture has to be really simple so that people can consume it. So we put a challenge on ourselves with every change we make culturally, which is to understand how the end user, whether they be in Saigon or Gdansk or in Sydney or in San Fran, how are they going to consume this? And if we can't answer that, then it's probably not ready to be released. Or we've overcomplicated it. We've made it something that in a workshop sounds great because it's got buzzwords in it. But when you actually strip it back, you go, I have no idea what they're going to do differently. They're going to read that and go, oh, cool, a mouse mat with values on it. Thanks. What do I do with it? Well, you put your mouse on it. It's like, but what does it give me? Unless it gives me something tangible, unless I know how to consume that, it's useless. ShipIt in 20% time is our innovation stream. So once a quarter we down tools. Everyone gets 24 hours to hack at whatever they want. There are absolutely no rules around what they hack, whether it be a product, a process, doesn't matter. 20% time is the thing that we do where we say to our teams, you should be spending on average 20% of your time on looking at the things outside the core part of your work. So for example, let's use Jira again. If you work on Jira and you work on one component of Jira in your team, what we say to you is 20% of your time you should spend maybe on another component in Jira or another team in Jira, or if you're an engineer, spend it with QA or tech writing or our design team or our product management team. That's a forcing function for our teams to get the blinkers off. And because it's 20% of the time, they either do it 1 day a week or 1 week every 5. And what happens is, just as you start to see the blinkers coming in on someone, they come out again, all right? And it's constantly just getting them to put the shoulders back and look broad. What's the impact of what I do? Am I collaborating with the right people? So again, that's just a gentle encouragement to them and a great learning curve.
How does that work with sprints?
We lock it into, we have a story point for 20% time. So we load it into all our sprints. It's the only way we can do it and people actually use it.
Yep.
Yeah, otherwise it gets consumed very quickly. And the final one is more of a mantra that I put in there, but it's been important for our team in Sydney because Sydney is our home. It's also where the vast majority of our team are, and it's also where our culture started. And it's really easy for people that have only ever lived and worked in Sydney to not understand the context of our other offices. And so what we've put in here is that we are one company, but we have many offices. And that enables us to say, it's all right to have a few subcultures, as long as we've done it on purpose. All right?
What's the difference between a pattern and a process?
So for me, a pattern is something that you see that occurs, and you see wisdom in it, and you decide to follow it again. We don't document our patterns. So one of our patterns is, at the end of every sprint, we do a retrospective. That's not written down or mandated. It's not a rule. It's completely by choice. Once one team follows that pattern, if they have success with it, they naturally follow that pattern again. So my pattern is, I always clean my teeth in the morning after I have my coffee. No one's taught me that, and no one mandates that, and if I choose not to do that, that's my choice. But when I do it the other way around, my coffee tastes really weird. Right, so that's my anti-pattern, because every now and then I forget and do it the wrong way. What am I doing, right? Now what we find is there is an inner strength in patterns that beats process every time, apart from one scenario. If you want high levels of repeatability. So if you're running a manufacturing site and you're running a manufacturing process, you might be all right to go process better than patterns. always put your safety gear on before you touch the toxic waste. It's probably better as a process, but if you think about the way your mind works, patterns are like stories, and stories you remember, but processes you don't. Processes you adapt and you forget. And if you go back to your office, look at some of your procedures that you've got online, I bet you're doing something subtly different from each of them, because what you're actually doing is the pattern that you found that works.
How would you copy the pattern across?
Teams mimic. So our teams see each other with successful patterns, and because they're competitive, they mimic. Because they also collaborate, they share. So when we do something well, we celebrate, and when we do something bad and it fails, we celebrate twice as hard. We do. We celebrate the anti-patterns just as strong as the patterns.
So they highlight the patterns that work for them.
Yeah. But the patterns come out as stories. So rather than a process document, someone will blog and say, in this team, we stood up a new team, this was the gnarly goal we had and the problem we were up against, this is how we solved it, we tried this and this is what worked. Similarly, a team will try something and it will fail, and they will blog about that failure. We actually get a slightly higher readership and number of likes on our celebrating our failures, because it's fresh for people. They're like, awesome, we're all humans.
How do you deal with ego in organisations? Because you talked about flat structure, lack of hierarchy, you talk about patterns over process. How does sort of that power and influence and ego work?
Part of it's in hiring. I think a major part of it is in hiring. The second part's in our values, because they don't have much room for ego. But also, they kind of do have room for ego. So if you've got someone that is egotistical and powerful, then you just be the change you seek on them and go, awesome. If you're that smart, be the change you seek. Show us what you've got. There's the freedom, there's the space. Here's ShipIt. Here's a quarterly exercise where you get to compete with your peers. Let's see how many votes you get. So without naming and shaming them, what you do is you give them the freedom to operate in their preferred style. But what tends to happen is, first of all, those kind of people they're not often successful in interviews, because we don't believe they'll work in our environment, because we're so much about teams, because the teams deliver infinitely more than the individuals. The ones that come in, and we're always conscious that a lot of people are the product of the environment they're in, and so in interviews you can get some negativity around people going, I hate where I am, it's terrible, it's horrible, I just need to get out of there. And you're like, okay, my question was, what will you bring to this organisation? But here's a tissue, it's fine, we'll be all right. You don't have to go back for another 40 minutes, we're in here together, it's fine. So we either find that in early stage of the process, or I find that as people adapt to our environment, if their driver is to be successful, they will adapt to our environment and they'll chisel off the edges. If their desire is to be powerful, they probably either won't get in the first place, or they get caught out really quickly. Our teams self-correct really quickly, because it's the wisdom of the crowd and the power of the masses. All right, it doesn't matter how powerful you feel as an individual. If you're in that shared environment and collaborating, you get caught really quickly. So I believe this mechanism will work out anywhere as a mechanism. The results of it are up for grabs, right? So it's very dependent on the environment and who you're working with and what you're working on. But we've used this mechanism, and there's nothing in here that I think is unique to Atlassian as an organisation. So first thing I formed was a weekly leadership team meeting across a subset of people. So firm believer that culture is something that sits in everyone, but if you give it to everyone, no one will do anything, right? You know, for the program managers in the room, the minute you ask someone what they're accountable for and they say everything, right, you get that kind of panic sensation. It's like, well, you're not. So you're either doing nothing or you think you're doing everything and you're failing. So we got a subset of people which spread across locations and different disciplines. We pick a quarterly top 3, all right? What are the top 3 things we want to deal with? We keep it to 3 because we think 3 is achievable, all right? We always know the 4th and the 5th and the 6th, and we actually publish them. We tell people what we're not doing, and we tell them what we are. We develop OKRs and GSMs. I love acronyms. OKRs, so objective and key results areas. They are more important for us because they enable us to be a little bit more stretch, to say, I know I might fail. In fact, I'm going to put it on the table at the start of the quarter, I might fail. Here's my objective. It's pretty lofty, and these are the key results that I'm looking for in that objective. And these are the things I'm going to try. And it's a really nice way of saying, please don't beat me up if I don't succeed at this, because I'm taking on something that's really quite hard. And certainly when you talk about culture, if you see someone making binary promises on culture, then I just get the fear instantly, right? Because you're just not going to succeed at that. GSM for us is a model we've borrowed from Google and other tech companies, which is goals, signals, and measures. So as a business, we love measuring, right? It's like, if you make this change, what metric are you going to affect? With cultural stuff, we get a hold of people who go, well, there's so much uncertainty around this, I don't know what the net result will be. So is that a reason for me not to start? And we said, no. You follow the goals, signals, metrics. So what is the goal? I want to improve the mood of the organization. Awesome. What signals are you going to look for throughout the quarter to see if you are having a positive effect on that? And as you see those signals, you keep your radar really wide. And as you see those signals throughout the quarter, you hone in on the 2 or 3 measures that will define success. So it's a great way of taking a level of uncertainty and evolving it over time. We publish our promise. So we go out to our entire audience and say, this is what we're doing, this is what we're not doing, and this is why. Here's the data points we looked at. This is what we talked about. This is what we consulted on. This is what we heard you say. We heard you, we listened, and this is what we're going to do. And that's our team's chance to say, Dom, you've picked the wrong thing. You thought you heard that we're upset with this, but actually that's fine. That was just a whinge. The thing we're really upset with is this. So far, we've had more support than we've had detractors. All right, it's hard to satisfy everyone all the time, but we've had more support than detractors. The most important thing is, for every promise we make, we have to ship something. Like the killer to cultural initiatives is they start with a grand fanfare of t-shirts, mugs, mouse mats, a giant all hands, CEO beating his chest, funky presentation, then everyone goes back to the desk and nothing changes. So we sometimes simplify the things that we're doing in here, the promises that we make, so we can actually demonstrate progress. We ship this. Now the thing is, shipping is not the measure of success. So if you're in an organization and you're thinking about cultural change, you go, we said we've changed from this way to that way, and we've plugged that new way in, we're done. Anyone for a yellow Glen? Let's have a sparkling, because we're finished. We've ticked off culture. What's next? It's not. Shipping is our measure of we've made our first step of progress. The real thing is tracking and measuring. What was that effect we thought would happen? Has it happened? Have there been any unintended consequences? And then one of 2 things happen. If we're successful, we celebrate. If we weren't, we course correct and try again. And all of this is published along the way. We keep our staff fully informed of what we're doing, why we're doing it, and what's happening. So let me talk quickly on the mechanism, which is this meeting, right? Because this might help. So one of the rules I have is everyone attending the meeting, there is no status reporting and no progress updates. I do not care for them. They are all things that you can share with me in advance. And if you wait till there's 7 people in a room and waste an hour on a status update, which is something that happened in the past that I could have read on my way into work, then I will shoehorn you into another building, right? It is a complete waste of time. We pick one area, one of the goals or one of the particular OKRs that we're working on, and we spar on it. So we present it and go, I'm working on graduate recruitment and how we go from 40 graduates this year, we want to get to 80. These are the things I'm trying, this is my approach. And we do, it's in Pixar, it's called a demo trust, which is where everyone in the room is allowed to rip shreds out of you, but they're not allowed to fix it. It's the most genius technique you can ever try. So you say to everyone in the room, you're allowed to critique my idea until I'm basically at the point of tears. But you can't fix it for me. I'm the only one that can fix it. So the minute you go, you shouldn't do it that way, what you should do, right, is I have to sit there with and literally give them a slap. And so what happens is over time you get people thinking they listen more and they listen to what you're trying to do and they say, I'm not sure how that will work in the universities in Melbourne, or I'm not sure how you're going to make that scale from 40 to 80. How are you going to do that? I've not seen enough yet that gives me confidence. And so you're giving that ownership, you're leaving the ownership and accountability with the person that should own it, but you're giving them the wisdom of your knowledge. We challenge each other to collaborate, and the question we ask is, how are you going to embed this? How will you make this stick? Not how will you ship it, how once you've shipped it will it stay? Will it become part of the norm? And then we ask, what's blocking this, or how can I help you get there? And what that drives is a very different behavior in those meetings, that we are now working as an effective team on solving these things together, rather than just being voyeurs who sit in a meeting once a week and laugh at other people's failures, all right, which I've been in other organizations. At the end of each quarter, as a team, we do a retrospective. What did we love? What did we loathe? What did we learn? And what did we lack? We then publish that retrospective as well as our OKRs to the entire team. This is what we did really well. This is what we shipped. This is the thing we delivered by accident. Awesome. This is the thing we delivered on purpose. This is as a team how we worked and the things that we're going to try next quarter. And we publish that and we go back round again. We rinse and we repeat.
Do you find those retrospectives stick? You know, the learnings out of there? Because I've been through that experience where there's a retrospective and then you have the next retrospective and it's the same.
Same thing, yeah.
Same things. That
the magic thing we do is bubble it back up to themes. We always try and come back to themes, and it's never more than 2 things we're going to work on.
Yeah.
So we have to be honest with our capacity to drive change that quickly. Well, it's also, if you enter a quarter knowing that at the end of it you're going to have a really honest conversation about how you went as a team, then it changes your approach to the quarter. So this loop is infinite, right? And it's kind of scary because you start thinking, each quarter you start thinking further ahead, not to game the system, but you know that there are consequences of failure, which is your peers will call you out in a very friendly manner that you didn't do the thing you promised. So therefore I'm only going to promise something that I think I can do. Is our teams do demo to each other within their team. Most of them are once a week, the rest at least once a fortnight. And that's when we're following a similar pattern to the demo trust, the brains trust, which is you can critique, but you can't fix for me. Because we're doing critique and not fixing, we find people will come earlier. So they will come with their idea when it's embryonic. When it was the people in the room were the critics, you only came when you thought you had the thing fully baked, but all you'd done is wasted 3 weeks baking something that no one wanted. So we're intervening earlier in the flow. Because so many of our products integrate, what we find is a lot of our teams are curious about how other teams work. So they tend to go to the other team's demos. They are open invites. My program managers attend a lot of the demos, and if they see one that had something in it where they go, that was genius, we then get them to present at the next all hands. So it's not everyone presents to everyone, otherwise that would be a full-time gig, but it's open to everyone. And what we find is either through the cross-pollination of people moving around teams, or integrations, or we see one and we publicise it.
Got a final question?
Yeah, what do you see as your biggest threat? I suppose you're not the only company in your field, and you're not the only company with a good employee culture and all of that. There's others doing it as well. What keeps you awake?
Continually hacking at this because we are relentless with it's not the threat. The threat is that we get complacent. The biggest threat to us is going, actually, we're #1 place to work. It's kind of awesome. Let's just carry on. And I don't think that will happen because I've got the right people in the organisation that don't allow that to happen. But it's then really hard to say most of what we're doing is new, uncharted territory. So I'm talking about, we do these quarterly ShipIts and innovation weeks and all this stuff, and I'm looking around for examples of companies that are doing the next iteration of that, and most companies go, no, we want you to tell us about that so we can copy you. We've not even thought of it yet. So I'm like, okay, so the next version of innovation for us is something that I've got to think of, except how do I do that? Now the dangerous way for me to do that is to sit at my machine on the plane on the way home tonight and do it by myself. The right way to do it is to see the wisdom of that crowd again and say, guys, you own the way we hack our culture. What do we do next? So it's keeping that freshness, but also keeping the foundations that make us who we are constant. And that's really hard, really hard. And it gets harder with scale.
I think we're out of time. On behalf of everyone, firstly, thank you everyone for coming.
Thank you.
On behalf of everyone, Dom, thanks for taking the time out.
Thank you for having me.
It's been a great session.
Thank you.